As always, I'm delighted to have you all here. By now, you've no doubt come to expect nothing less than a frightful excursion into the bizarre, the unexplained, and the downright horrifying. Case in point, exactly what happens to a man when he forgets to be careful about what he wishes for? Well, you're about to find out. Our story is called The Hunter, and such nightmares are quite common on the Nightfall radio show. In the years before the coming of the European explorer Marco Polo, in the Chinese province of Guizhou, in the village of Kaili, there lived a man named Qin. Qin had heard that in a central region of the Kunlun Mountains, just south of the Taklamakan Desert, there lived strange creatures. He took it upon himself to strike out to the region and hunt some of the beasts about which he had heard. His trek was long and arduous, and there were many dangers along the way, which could make up many stories in and of themselves. But when Qin finally reached the area that he'd been seeking, he climbed high up the heavily wooded slopes in search of game. Though he often heard the calls of birds and the sounds of animals in the thickets and underbrush, and though he kept his bow and arrow at the ready, he caught sight of neither pheasant nor deer. That night, Qin became greatly discouraged. He built a simple shelter of bamboo branches, telling himself that the next day would bring the prize that had so far eluded him. Later that same night, as Qin huddled in his cloak, trying to fall asleep, he was startled to hear the sound of heavy footsteps in the clearing outside. Carefully, he peered out of his lean-to. He was shocked to see a tall, thin man, at least 10 feet tall, dressed in white robes. "I have come to ask your help," the stranger said. "I'm going to fight against my enemy tomorrow. Help me, and I will reward you handsomely." Qin was delighted. "I will be glad to help," he said. "What must I do?" "Tomorrow, before you prepare your evening meal, go to the stream that flows to the east of here," the tall stranger said. "My enemy will be coming from the north, and I will be meeting him from the south. But mind you, I shall be the one in white, and he will be the one in yellow." And though these words puzzled him, Qin promised that he would do exactly as instructed. Next morning, Qin went out in search of game, but returned to his camp empty-handed. Hunger burned in his stomach, and he remembered that it was mealtime. The time had come for him to fulfill his promise to the tall visitor. Now, he'd gone only a short distance when he came to the stream that his visitor had spoken of. From the heavy growth on the north bank, he heard a popping and hissing sound. As he listened, Qin thought that he could make out the sound of bushes being uprooted and trees falling. Then he heard a similar sound coming from the south side of the stream. To his horror and utter disbelief, 2 huge snakes, each easily 100 feet long, burst forth from the bush, a yellow one from the north and a white one from the south. The serpents clashed at midstream and flailed at each other with their powerful, monstrous tails. Qin looked on in complete terror and disbelief. As he watched the snakes struggle, he realized that neither snake seemed to have the advantage. Their coiled bodies churned the stream to a muddy froth, while their gargantuan tails lashed the water with the fury of a thunderstorm. Gradually, the yellow serpent seemed to weaken, and Qin was hiding a short distance away, and he realized that the stranger that he'd met the night before must have been the white snake in human form. And so, true to his word, he drew his bow and shot the yellow snake. Then he fired a second and third arrow, both of which hit home, and the snake fell back, mortally wounded. Then the swift current of the stream quickly carried the bloody, lifeless body out of sight. Then the white snake turned and retreated into the thicket on the south bank. And Chin, not knowing what else to do, returned to his camp to wait. When night fell, the stranger returned to Chin to thank him. "You may stay here and hunt in these mountains for 1 year. From this day on, you will find all the game you want. But be warned, you must leave this place when the year is over. Never return. If you fail in this, ghastly fortune will befall you." "I promise," said the hunter. And with a solemn nod, the tall stranger vanished into the night. Now everything came to pass as promised. The mountain woods and meadows provided the hunter with boundless game, and the stream overran fish into his nets. And he decided that when he returned to his village, he would sell a portion of his bounty. Through this, Chin became the wealthiest man in the province. And he marked the days carefully, so that when the year was up, he left the mountains, vowing to himself, as he had the stranger, never to return. The years passed, and Chin was careless with his riches. When his money ran out, his hunting and fishing barely brought him enough to eat. Most nights, he would sit in his hut, eating a bowl of watery rice with a single piece of fish in it, and gazing into the distance toward the forbidden mountains. In his mind, he would envision the glades where vast herds of deer grazed and the streams that teemed with fish. Then he would remember the dark warning the strange visitor had given, and he turned his head and gave a sigh. Soon Chin had nothing to eat except a few wilted roots and dried bark. His stomach churned with a hunger that raged like the Yangtze River. So great was his hunger that he finally thought to himself, "Surely enough time has passed, and my hunger is so great that the white snake would not punish me for going to the mountains for just 1 day." So next morning he set out for the mountains, where he quickly found that the hunting was as good as ever. He soon had 30 fat pheasants tied to his shoulder strap. Then at the height of his contentment, he came face to face with a familiar tall figure dressed in white. "Foolish little man," cried the stranger. "Did I not warn you that you must never come here again? Now the sons of Bolath, my enemy, have grown and seek to avenge their father's death, and I am powerless to prevent it." With these words, Chin's heart exploded with unbridled terror. He begged the tall stranger to tell him how to escape. "You're too late," said the stranger, and he instantly vanished into the green shadows of the forest. And at that same moment, Chin heard a sound like wind blowing through the trees directly at him. He was gripped like a vice by fear. He flung down his bundle of pheasants and tore down the wooded path. The horrible sounds kept coming closer, and sweat raced across Chin's face as he began to run faster and faster down the trail. Gradually, the sounds started to fade into a gentle breeze until they vanished altogether. Chin stumbled into a clearing, wiping his brow of sweat and sighing with relief. When he looked up, he realized that he was at the very edge of the woods, at the foot of the mountains. But when the shaken hunter was halfway across the open space, 3 men dressed in yellow satin robes, all of them 8 or 9 feet tall, suddenly slipped from the trees and encircled him. Chin watched as their yellow robes slid off, like shed snakeskin. The hunter finally resigned to the horrid insanity which bathed him, and he screamed. He simply screamed. The 3 opened their impossibly huge mouths and kept opening them, even as their hands and feet dissolved into serpentine bodies, which lengthened and coiled. Then in one final instant of terror, satisfaction, fear, and pleasure, the deer and birds and other creatures of the forest were frozen in place, as the unspeakable sound of 3 sets of powerful jaws clamping shut eclipsed the mountains and forest. And then there was only silence.